Welcome to another episode of the Looking After Nature podcast, where we hope to bring you closer to nature and wildlife in Hampshire. My name is Andy Davidson. I'm here once again with my co-host, Carly Harrod. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Andy. So spring is well underway and there is so much coming to life at the moment.
Yes, the birds are breeding here. I've got robins building nests in the garden and the blue tits checking out the nest boxes. I've had bumblebees and butterflies about. Daffodils are all well out. So there's a lot going on at the moment.
There is, isn't there? And there's so much we could talk about this month. But one of our special habitats is heathland. And heathland is home to some of our rarest and most exciting wildlife, such as smooth snakes and Dartford warblers. And today we're going to be talking with Jean from the North Sites team about the secrets of our heathland. But what exactly is a heathland, Andy?
Actually, I was out on one of our heathlands earlier this week, helping a local team with their breeding bird surveys on the heathland. Heathlands are often seen as wastelands, but they're immensely rich in very special wildlife. It probably began about 5,000 years ago when humans started clearing trees, growing on infertile soils or the sandy soils around the country, probably to entice game into clearings to make hunting easier. And later they were used for livestock grazing. So most heathlands are thought to be dating from around the Bronze Age, some 3,000 years ago. The poor soils were no longer of use for growing crops or really intensive grazing, but they still held value for providing rough grazing, heather for thatch, turs for fuel, bracken for bedding and potash for soap, also for heating the bread ovens. And all this activity would have kept the areas clear of most trees. And in heaths, you tend to find it's just mainly gorse and short heather and short grass with bare ground.
So this landscape used to cover quite a lot of the country, didn't it? But it's now become very rare.
Yes, Hampshire still has quite a lot, such as the New Forest, but other areas have lost huge areas of heathland. I was lucky enough to manage heathlands in the north of the county that Jean now works on. Hi, Jean.
Hi, Andy.
So you work in the north of the county. How long have you been up there?
I will have been there 12 years this year.
Yeah, I started there, I hate to say it, 30 years ago. We're talking about heathlands, but there are different types of heath, aren't they? Which sort of sites do you look after?
So the heaths we look after are lowland heaths, and they're made up of a mosaic of habitats that include valley mires, wet heath and dry heath. And each of these habitats has its own conditions that suit the different plants and animal species that live there.
So which sites do you actually manage?
So the team I work with managed Yateley Common and Castle Bottom National Nature Reserve in the north of Hampshire. And then down the east side of Hampshire, we also manage Short Heath Common and Broxhead Common. And all four of those are lowland heathlands.
So these are away from the New Forest, aren't they? These are in the different areas of the county.
Yeah, these are all up the north and east of the county. So they're very separate from the New Forest, and they're much smaller sites than the New Forest.
They're part of those bigger areas, say in what we call the Weald and the Thames Basin. So those areas there, and those heathlands would have been much bigger, wouldn't they? So what's happened to make them smaller?
Yeah, so in the last 200 years, about 84% of heathlands, lowland heathlands, have been lost through development and conifer plantations. So up in the north of the county, we don't have the vast expanses like in the New Forest. We just have sites that's part of bigger networks of sites. So as you said, the Thames Basin Heath up in the north and the Wealden Heath in the east. And so rather than have the large expanse of heathlands, we have pockets of heath that are all sort of interconnected in a network.
So you've ended up with little tiny fragments of heathland, like little pockets left all over the place. You haven't got the big expanses like with the New Forest now, have you?
No, absolutely not. They're just small sites that are interconnected with other small sites. So it's really important that we manage the sites in combination with each other.
So what sort of work do you carry out to keep those areas open?
So our team work on keeping the heathlands open. So heathlands will naturally try and scrub up and regenerate into woodlands because they're no longer traditionally used in the same ways that they were years ago. Do that through a combination of works. We use volunteers to help remove scrub in the winter time, so removing birch saplings, oak saplings, pine saplings, and if the site has too much gorse on it, removing some of the gorse as well to manage the amount of that, and to just maintain the open character. But due to the size of our sites, we can't really just maintain the sites with just human power. So quite often we have to use machinery in certain areas to help clear large areas to maintain that open space.
It seems quite counterintuitive. There's a lot of messaging about how good trees are and planting trees and all this sort of thing. But quite often some of the work we do is actually clearing those trees, isn't it? It's difficult to explain to people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And Heathlands is especially bad in that respect, that people just don't understand the work we do. So we do a lot of work to try and to explain to people why we need to remove the trees in those areas. And the reason for that is that obviously the special plants and animals that live on heathlands have become dependent on that open landscape that's rich in I say rich. It's acidic soil, so it's considered waste ground because it's very poor in soil, which means that the heathers and the gorses thrive there. And this brings in a unique, diverse range of species that are reliant on this habitat. So if we were to allow all of it to scrub up and become woodland again, then obviously we would lose those important species.
And there's that strange thing, isn't it? We say it's poor soils, but poor soils normally leads to very rich diversity, because if you get really rich soils, only a few species can dominate. But you're removing that dominance by a few species and allowing a lot more species to get in there by having this poor conditions, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And heathlands, if you kind of look below the kind of instant views and the open landscapes that people generally visit for, and if you actually really get down to it, the species that live there are quite remarkable, diverse range of them. That most people miss when they visit the site, but are really, really quite amazing.
Yeah, one of my specialisms was bees and wasps. I mean, two of the sites you now manage, Castle Bottom and Broxett Common. There's over 100 species of ants, bees and wasps living on those places, and it's really amazing what it does hold.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the work we do to manage the site includes work for those species as well. So last year we had volunteers out creating bee banks on Castle Bottom. So creating bare earth banks that are suitable for bees to mining bees to kind of find little ways into and create holes in, so that they can nest in them. So we do work for all sorts of species as well.
So there's quite a lot of very scarce species on there. I mean, which particular ones are your favourites?
Well, I think my favourite has to be the silver-studded blue butterfly. It's a lovely little butterfly, really distinctive blue with the silver sort of spots on its hind wings. And it's quite often missed by visitors to the site because it's so small and it likes to live out on the young shoots of heather. So it lays its eggs on the young shoots. When they hatch as caterpillars or pupae, they have a really interesting relationship with ants. The caterpillars smell like the ants, so the ants take them into their nests where they overwinter, and then obviously hatch as butterflies the following year. And each year they do this, they live on the young heather. And that's why we also manage the heathlands for a mosaic of different age structures of plants. So not only different age ranges of heathers, but gorses as well, as different animals rely on different age structures of heather out on the heath in order to survive.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these insects in particular have got really interesting lifestyle. I mean, have you heard of the slave maker ant? Have you ever seen that out on site?
I've not seen it, but yes, I have heard of it.
So it's, people know wood ants, those big red and black ants you get living in the woods to make the big mounds. It's a relative of theirs, but they live almost exclusively on the heathlands. And they make much smaller nests. And they're called slave makers because what they do is they raid the nests of a certain black ant that lives near them. And they steal their young and pupae, take them back to their nest. And then when those ants, those black ants hatch out, they look after the colony of the slave maker ant. Act really like, as you would with slave, which is it's a fantastic story. And there's loads of these sort of stories on the heathland. There's so many species to talk about. So the thing these insects are really quite like the heathlands for is that sun getting down to the ground. You know, because when the trees come in, they're called shading, and then the ants can't survive on the ground, and all those ground nesting bees will disappear. And clearly another thing that is quite important on the heathlands is reptiles, isn't it? So what special reptiles have you got on site?
Yes, absolutely. On our heathland site, we have adders and grass snakes, and also common lizards. On Broxhead Common, which is one of our sites, we've also got recent records of sand lizards as well, which are spread over from a neighbouring site. So we have all of those reptiles on site, and potentially also smooth snake, although we don't have any recent records of those, so we don't know if they're currently on any of our sites at the moment. Reptiles are really a really important part of the heathland habitat as well. So we work closely with the Hampshire Isle of Wight Amphibian Reptile Group, who survey them across our sites. And it's really important to get survey results for them, so that can tell us how to maintain certain areas of the heath, ensure that we maintain the open heathland areas, that we have that mosaic of plant species that I talked about earlier, and the areas that are known hibernaculars, so places where the snakes will overwinter, that they don't become too overgrown.
So I talked earlier about some of the helping out with the bird surveys. I know you've been out quite early as well, looking for some of the birds as well, haven't you?
Yes, at this time of year, not too early, but as we get into summer, it does get earlier and earlier. Up for sunrise and out searching for the heathland birds that call our heathlands home. So these include the woodlark, which is a ground nesting bird and has this beautiful song. You see them sort of hovering above the ground and singing out. Also the Dartford warbler at this time of year, which is a very shy and elusive little bird, but you can see it flitting around the gorse bushes. So those are the two sort of primary birds that we're looking for at this time of year. But then we're also recording any other warblers or woodpeckers or any kind of birds that we're seeing out on the heath at this time of year in the early morning.
And as we get into the year, also the nightjar will start turning up as well, and that's such a weird bird, isn't it?
Absolutely, the nightjar is a very mysterious little bird. I say little; it's bigger than the other birds I've mentioned. But it heads back over from its wintering grounds in Africa. From about now onwards, they can start to arrive sort of end of April, May time, and they are ground nesting birds. So they're very well camouflaged. If you ever see one on the ground, it just looks like a stick or a log. It's they don't have to build a nest because they just find a hollow in the ground and they look just like a piece of stick on the ground. And they generally will stay on their nest throughout the day, so very few people really tend to see them unless they go out specifically looking for them, because during the day they're just sat on the ground, and then at night that's when they really get busy, and they're nocturnal birds, so they come up at the sunset and you can see them swooping across the open habitat, and they have this amazing sound that they make, this churring sound. I'm not even going to try and replicate it because I couldn't do that, but it's a very eerie sound that kind of echoes out across the heathland. It's wonderful to hear and to see them swooping around at sunset, feeding on the moths and insects that are flying around.
You said you weren't in, you didn't want to do an impersonation of a nightjar, and I don't blame you, because I don't think I could do one these days. Well, I couldn't do one ever, I don't think. But we've actually managed to find a little recording we're going to play. They really are strange birds. There's a lot of mythology around them. I mean, some names are like fern owl, but there's an old name called goat sucker, because it was thought they used to go into people's barns at night and drink the milk and steal the milk from the goats. Clearly they don't do that. I mean, they feed on moths, don't they? Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that, as you say, there's a lot of mythology behind them, and because people just didn't understand them because they only came out at night. But you can definitely see that they're definitely just eating insects and swooping around. So none of those are true.
Fly around the edges of woods, and they can fly quite several miles to go and hunt, but they quite often like those woodland edges because that's where the moths are, tends to be. And actually, if you've ever had them in the hand, if you're ringing them, things like that, they've got a massive mouth. It looks like the top of their head's coming off. Because clearly they fly along and catch them in their big mouths, catch the moths in their big mouths, and they've got these bristles that stick out the side of the mouth as well to funnel the moths in. They've also got in their middle toe, the claw has got a comb on the inside of it. And I think that's probably for cleaning these bristles on the side of the mouth. They're very weird birds. So you talked about woodlark nesting on the ground, including the nightjar nest on the ground. The dartford warbler actually nests close, normally not more than a foot above the ground in the heather. So, I mean, they're really susceptible to disturbance, aren't they?
They are indeed, yeah. And at this time of year, when they're nesting, we very much ask visitors to the heaths to be wary of that and to stick to the main paths and to keep dogs out of the vegetation and under close control. Because, yeah, as you say, they are really at risk of being disturbed. And obviously, if they have nested, they could be scared off their nest and they might not return. Nightjars are quite interesting. In that when they're disturbed from their nest, they tend to fly off in a haphazard way, as if they're injured, so that they draw any predator away from the nest. So that's quite interesting. But generally, we do encourage people to try and not disturb them as much as possible, so that they can nest without disturbance and their populations can continue to grow, because they are a threatened species. With loss of habitat that we talked about earlier, far fewer places to nest than they would have done in the past. So it's really important that we help to protect them.
And that's why we ask people to keep their dogs under control as well and keep them to the path. That sort of level of disturbance can quickly impact these birds, can't they? Absolutely,
yes. Their populations have been monitored over the past 10, 15 years, and they are very susceptible to changes. So any disturbance can have a huge effect. But also the weather conditions when they're nesting. Dartford warblers in particular are highly susceptible to the snow. So if the snow comes at the wrong time of year, if say we have a late winter snow, just at the point where they're nesting, they can actually get trapped in the gorse, under the gorse and heather, and not be able to get out to feed. So their populations really do sort of go up and down depending on the conditions that are around each year. So it's vitally important that we do everything we can to help protect them.
And that's the odd thing about Dartford warblers as well, because they're insect eaters like the nightjars are. The nightjars travel down to Africa for the winter, because clearly there's not a lot of moths flying around for them. But the Dartford warblers, they like feeding in the gorse where there's hibernating spiders and other insects. So they don't leave for the winter, do they? They stay with us.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we can survey them all year round. Obviously, we primarily survey in the springtime, but yeah, we get records all year round of Dartford warblers out on the heathlands.
And it's those really severe winters that really knock them back, as you say, that long-lying snow, that massively bad winter of 62, 63. I don't even remember that one, where we had snow lying for 3 months. I think the population of Dartford warblers went down to about 5 pairs in the entire country. But you've got more than that now, haven't you? Just at Yateley Common, how many do you think you've got there?
So on Yateley Common, we've got at least 5 pairs just on that one site. So the same number as you said that it went down to in the whole country. And they are doing extremely well. They quite regularly have young, and we're definitely seeing an increase in the population. In fact, figures from the Thames Basin Heath surveys that were carried out last year found that all 3 of the woodlark, nightjar and Dartford warbler populations are at the highest they've been in the last 10 years. So that's really good news for their populations. But obviously, as we've already said, the weather conditions are a big factor in that. And it only takes one bad winter and that can completely plummet again.
Yeah, so clearly we can't control the snow and the weather But the best we can do is actually make sure the conditions of the heathlands are there for them when the times are good for them, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can't manage the weather, as you say. So we obviously spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the heathlands are kept open, that there's that mosaic of different plant structures, and that also there are still trees around the edges and cooling posts for the birds to land on, so that they can see out over the heath and they can call to each other. And that we just maintain the heathland as best we can, as a good environment for them.
One particular issue on heaths is fire. I mean, it's been a traditional management in quite a lot of places. And actually, heather, it's quite odd. The seed reacts to heat and it can make it more likely to germinate. But fire at the wrong time for us is just a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our sites are, as we've discussed, quite small sites. So we tend not to use fire as a management technique, simply because there's too many people around and it's too built up in the environment. Wildfires can be devastating for a heathland. If a wildfire happens at the wrong time of year, then it can wipe out all the great work that we've done to the heathlands. And it can really devastate the population of species that are there at the time. Wildfires generally, obviously, tend to happen when it's drier, so in the summer months. And at those times of years, you've got the birds nesting, you've got the reptiles out and about, you've got insects flying around, and those can all be affected by the loss of habitat, but also killed themselves if they're in that area. So wildfires can be a huge problem for us. So we do try and let people know about the issues of wildfires, and obviously at certain times of year we ask people to be extra cautious when out on the heath, making sure that they're not discarding anything. I mean, even a plastic bottle can diffract light and cause something to start heating up and smoke and fire. So we ask people not to put cigarettes out on the heath and not to have barbecues in the countryside, unless you're in a site where that's specifically allowed. So out on our heathlands sites, anything that's likely to cause any sort of fire, we ask people not to do. And to really try and avoid any activity that could cause fires to spread easily. Gorse, in particular, burns at really high temperatures. So the fire on a heathland can really build up temperature and spread very quickly across a heathland. So yeah, you're not just talking about little fires. Wildfires can have huge, devastating effects on heathlands.
So we also have to ask the question of our people who come on this, but where do you think your favourite site is?
That's a very difficult question to answer. All our sites, they're each unique in their own way, but I think my favourite has to be Castle Bottom National Nature Reserve. It's a lovely little site. It's hidden up in the north of the county. I'd like to say not very many people know about it, but it's becoming famous in its own right. Lots more people are using it these days than ever before. But it's a beautiful site. It's one of the only ones we have that is grazed. So we have a group of Exmoor ponies that graze it. So they're lovely to go out and see. But it also has a little stream running through it, and it has the whole sort of range of habitats from the sort of mire to the wet heath and the dry heath above that. And it's just a really lovely site to go and walk around. I especially like to go out on a sunny morning when there's not too many people around, and you can catch glimpses of the dragonflies and butterflies in the sun, just kind of warming up for the day. So it's a really, really kind of special site to go and visit.
Yeah, that's the correct answer, Jean, because it was my first site when I became a ranger in the early 90s, and I was actually the first ranger for that site when the county bought it, and it is a fabulous little site. Well, thank you, Jean. It's been great to hear about the special habitats and sensitive management and the great work that your team does in trying to protect these sites.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great talking about it.
Great to find out what you can find in these special places. Some top tips that can help make the most of your visit are to visit at dusk on summer evenings if you are hoping to hear nightjars, and scan the tops of gorse bushes because they are the favourite perching posts for the dark-footed warblers, stonechats and other heathland birds. Also look in sunny spots for basking reptiles such as the lizards, and you may even be lucky enough to spot an adder. I've actually never seen a live adder in my 20 years of being a ranger, so I will be out looking for one this summer. But please remember to stay on the paths and don't let your dog wander off either. The plants and animals that call our heathlands home are especially sensitive to disturbance, and we need to help them continue to thrive.
Yes, it's all about following the countryside code and ensuring you know what to do when you're out and about and exploring.
So Andy, are you ready for another of Carly's fun facts?
I'm always ready for Carly's fun facts, Carly.
So, we all know now, hopefully, that a slow worm is not a worm or a snake, but it is in fact a legless lizard. But did you know that they can live for up to 20 years?
Yeah, for such a small animal, it's that's quite an age, isn't it?
It is. And did you know that the female incubates her eggs internally, so she gives birth to around 8 legless lizards every summer?
And you talked about adders earlier. Adders do the same. They don't lay eggs like you imagine, most lizards and snakes to do. They keep their young inside them and give birth to live young.
Yeah, and that's why I've probably never found any slow worm eggs in my compost heaps, even though I have lots of slow worms.
Yeah, you never will.
No.
And actually, if you want to go out and see adders, about now's the best time to do it, because when it's really hot in the middle of the summer, they eat up at the start of the day and then they disappear into the undergrowth. But actually now, they're actually coming out of hibernation and they're trying to warm up. So if you look carefully along banks where there's adder populations, you can sometimes see them sitting in little sunny areas.
Hopefully I'll be off to visit some of Jean's sites in the north of the county and hopefully spot some adders. So we hope you have all enjoyed this episode of Looking After Nature. We'd love to hear from you with any comments or thoughts, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss in a future episode. Please let us know by checking out Hampshire Countryside's social media pages. And also check out Yateley Common and the North Sites Facebook pages too.
We really appreciate it if you rate and review our podcast on iTunes, as this helps other people find us. For now, thanks again for listening. I'm Andy Davidson.
And I'm Carly Harrod. See you next time.